first question that I've asked everyone in this video series that we talked to is to take you back to your law beginnings and what made you decide to become an attorney, and tell us about your law school experience.
Yeah. Okay. I can't really think of one particular thing that made me want to become a lawyer or go to law school. But I think, growing up, my parents always instilled in me a desire to help people. And so when I graduated from undergraduate school, that was one of my thoughts in terms of what is it that I can do that will allow me to help people. So my major was business administration. I didn't see that as an avenue of doing something that could really help people. And so I thought about law, and I enjoyed reading. I enjoyed the use of words, and it seemed to be a good fit for me. And I think those combinations of things led me to the law as opposed to probably anything else.
And what year and where was that when you were in law school?
I was in law school, I started in 1970, and I finished in 73. I just come back from the Peace Corps. And, actually, I'd come back probably a year or two earlier. And I was working with a publishing company in New Jersey at the time. And that's when I decided to go to law school. I went to Rutgers University in New Jersey. I went there because I got a scholarship. And my time there was excellent. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the law. I enjoyed studying, and didn't necessarily like the location. And so I tell people that my final exam was on a Thursday, and Friday I was back in North Carolina. So I'd always intended to come back. This is where I wanted to be. This is where I wanted to practice. And so that was my decision at the time.
And take us through your career. And your career has always been in Wake County, correct?
Correct.
So take us through your career here.
So in 73, I was working for Legal Aid in Durham. And that's when I found out that I had, 74. And that's when we got the results from the bar exam. And I had always intended to practice in Wake County. Dan Blue, who ended up being my law partner, and I were good friends. And he and I had worked in Charlotte during the time that we were in law school. And both of us were clerking for Julius Chambers' law firm. And we'd always talked about opening a law firm, coming to Raleigh, sort of trying to replicate what the Chambers law firm had done in Charlotte. And so after I passed the bar, Dan was married, I was single, and so it was easier for me to open a practice. And so I opened a solo practice. I was practicing by myself. The location was on Hargett Street, and it was right above a drugstore. And so I did that for a couple of years, and Dan joined me after that. We formed the law firm of Thigpen and Blue. Then we were joined by Carlton Fellers, and then Ralph Stevens, and the law firm became Thigpen, Blue, Stevens, and Fellers. And so I practiced law for about 35 years with the law firm. Then I was appointed to the bench, and I was appointed as a special Superior Court judge. Did that for several years, and then I was appointed to the North Carolina Court of Appeals, and I did that for several years. And then I taught law school at North Carolina Central. And then that takes me from 1974 until 2015, when I retired in 2015.
And through all of that amazing career, can you describe the change, not just to Wake County, but to the legal landscape in Wake County through those years?
The change. Well, when I first started, all the lawyers knew each other. We all started out kind of together. We were all going to court together. We knew each other's names. And so the bar at that time was relatively small, I'd say. And then, as the years progressed, we got more lawyers in Wake County. Most of the lawyers that I practiced with in the very beginning were male. And so one of the changes that I've seen or that I saw over the years was that we ended up having more female lawyers. We got more African-American lawyers. So the bar became a bit more diversified than it was when I first started.
And even when you graduated law school in the early 1970s, what was the makeup of your class then?
I'm not really sure. It may have been more males than females. I don't know the percentages, but just in looking at the classes that I had, I would tend to think that we probably had more males than females at that time. All of that has changed. And when I was teaching at North Carolina Central's law school, it was probably 50-50. And now my understanding that it's probably maybe 60% female and 40% male. So, there's been a drastic change from when I first started practicing.
And in Wake County in general, what have you seen in the shift starting from the early 1970s into now into the 2020s? The cultural change, the people here versus then, what have you seen?
I don't know. Wake County's been sort of consistent. I don't know that we have had any drastic changes other than the changes that I've mentioned. But I think in terms of the practice, one of the things I think that really changed when I was practicing was advertising. And when I first started, we didn't have advertising. And so, you had to be a good lawyer. You had to have a good reputation. You wanted word of mouth to be good in the community so that you got clients. And then I think there was a Supreme Court case that altered that. It said that lawyers could advertise. And then that's what lawyers started doing probably in the 1980s. And that was a drastic change. Probably the biggest change that I saw when I was practicing law.
And was your location always there in downtown Raleigh? Your firms? And the changes there as far as the courthouse and the new courthouse and Fayetteville Street, what was it like then versus now?
Well, we had several changes. I think when I first started, Fayetteville Street was a street. Then it changed, and then it became a mall. That didn't quite work out, for lawyers, and because people had no place to park when they came down. And then it went back to a street, which I think was better than what we had before. The courthouse was pretty much the same. I don't think that we necessarily had any drastic changes to the courthouse. And the biggest thing is that we continue to have an influx of lawyers. And so the composition of lawyers practicing in Wake County was changing. The law firms got bigger. They were a little smaller when I first started. And we started having more law firms. And, of course, competition increased. And so, I think those are sort of the changes that I remember during the time that I was practicing.
And through your career, tell us about the importance of a mentor-mentee relationship. Like, do you attribute a mentor to helping you earlier in your career? And then how did you take that to you later in your career, being a mentor to someone else?
Yeah. I thought it was sort of important. I had a mentor. My mentor at the time was George Green, who later became a district court judge. And George was always someone that I could go to when I had questions. He was sort of an expert in real estate, and I hated real estate. I didn't like doing it, but it was a source of income, and I was a solo practitioner. So George was someone that I could go to. I could ask him about searching titles. I could get feedback. I felt more comfortable in the courtroom than I did searching titles. And so in addition to that, he sort of gave me pointers about practicing law, dealing with clients, that it probably would have taken me years to learn. Later on, as I got older and had been in practice for a period of time, there were young lawyers who came to me asking me about practice. And so I ended up becoming a mentor to those lawyers and imparting the same information that George Green had given me in a different fashion, because I wasn't doing real estate, but I was trying cases, doing business matters. And so I could pass information on to the young lawyers about those areas of expertise.
You mentioned talking about how your mentor helped you with how you relate to clients. Talk to us about that attorney-client relationship and the importance of it and how you approached that in your career.
Well, when I first started, I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, it just surprised me that people would pay me to give them advice, and I'm just a young lawyer. I mean, I'm green. I don't really know anything. And I guess the thing I learned about the attorney-client relationship is people really do depend on us. They depend on us to take their hand, to guide them through this maze of things that they know absolutely nothing about, to advise them in a sound manner, and to make decisions in their best interest. And so I always tried to do that when I was practicing law. I tried to make sure that I had no conflicts. I tried to be very honest with my clients. If we had problems with cases, I tried to sit down with them and explain the problems to them. And in turn, I think clients appreciated that. I tried not to inflate the things that I thought that I could do for them. And I realized that creating certain expectations was very important in the practice of law. You couldn't create a very high expectation if you knew that there was no way that you could reach that. And so I think clients also appreciated that you were upfront with them and that you explained the problems of a case to them.
When you were practicing, what's a case and a client that really sticks in your memories and in your heart as you making a difference?
Probably a case in which I was representing employees of the North Carolina Agricultural Extension Service. And this was a case that started way back in 1971, even before I started practicing law. And it was a case that had been filed by Julius Chambers and the Legal Defense Fund. And the clients were black extension agents who had been discriminated against by the North Carolina Extension Service. And up to a certain point, there was a segregated system, as there was sort of across the board in North Carolina in many aspects of life. But the black agents received less pay than the white agents. Their working conditions were different, less quality working conditions, and they only got promoted up to a certain level and couldn't go beyond that. So Julius and the Legal Defense Fund filed a lawsuit back in 71. It lay dormant for a while. And in the 80s, he asked me if I would take up that case. He also asked another lawyer, young lawyer, who was practicing in Pennsylvania, whose name is Ed Riedman. And he asked both of us if we would be willing to represent the plaintiffs. We met with the plaintiffs. There were a good number of them, probably about 70 or 80 plaintiffs. All of them were graduates of North Carolina A&T. All of them were ag extension agents. All of them have been discriminated against in salary and promotions. And they were just very nice people, just hardworking, cared about the extension service, wanted to do a good job. But they realized that they had not been paid the same as white agents, yet they were doing the same work. And so we picked that up. We started taking depositions. The Justice Department joined us in representing the plaintiffs. So we had private counsel, and we also had the Justice Department. The case went to trial in 1981. We tried the case for about 8 weeks. It was tried before Judge Dupree, who was a federal district court judge in Wake County. And Judge Dupree ruled against us. We appealed the case to the Fourth Circuit, and the case was heard by a 3-judge panel. Sitting on that panel was Judge Phillips, who used to be the dean of the law school at UNC Chapel Hill. The 3-judge panel ruled against us also. We then requested a hearing en banc for the Fourth Circuit. That request was denied. And then we decided to apply for certiorari with the U.S. Supreme Court, which we did. And normally, those petitions are turned down, especially if it's private counsel. But because we had the government with us, the Justice Department, they granted the petition for cert. And the Supreme Court ruled in our favor 9-1. They sent the case back to the Fourth Circuit. The Fourth Circuit sent the case back to the district court. And we were getting ready to retry the case. And the night before the trial was to begin, we ended up settling the case with the state of North Carolina. That was a case that I felt very good about. I felt that we had done a good service for our clients. And the lawyers involved in that case, Ed Riedman, who I mentioned, who was in Pennsylvania, Burton Craig is a lawyer who is here in Wake County, And Burton was working as a young lawyer with the Justice Department at the time. Squire Paget, who was with the Justice Department. And we have all remained friends since that time. And as a matter of fact, we're going to get together in November of this year. And we remained friends with the plaintiffs in the case. And we would often get together and have dinner with them, have meetings with them. Many of them have passed on. They've died. But we had a great relationship between the plaintiffs and the lawyers, and even amongst the lawyers. And so that's been one of my memorable cases.
And so you, after all of that, you got justice for those clients. And the whole case was about discrimination. Do you believe that you, as attorneys, were being discriminated against when the judges were ruled against you all those times?
No, I don't think so.
No, you don't think so? I was just wondering. I was like, through the course of conversation. And that's that's an amazing story through all of that. Take us through what you got on the bench. What's a memorable, what sticks out to you as something that was significant during your time on the bench that was really meaningful to you, or you felt was very impactful?
You know, I think the thing about being on the bench is trying to be as fair as you possibly can be. You know, one thing I learned about being on the bench that I really didn't think about as being when I was a lawyer is that there are, in fact, two sides to every story. As an advocate, I take one side as a lawyer when I was practicing. As a judge, you know, you listen to both. And, you know, you're sitting there, especially in motion court, and lawyer for the plaintiff gets up and tells a story, and you think to yourself, well, why are we here? I mean, that's pretty clear. Plaintiffs ought to prevail. And then the defendant's lawyer gets up, and then after you listen to it for a while, you realize that there really are two sides of this story. And so I think the difficult part for a judge is trying to be as fair as the judge can be to all parties involved in the case. And that you really do have to listen to what each side has to say about the case. I think, you know, if I learned anything on the bench, that was probably one of the most important things I learned about being a judge. Another thing that I learned is that, you know, if you make a mistake, you need to own up to it and you need to admit it. And I can remember I held court in Guilford County, and it was some sort of domestic matter. It was a motion, and I heard the motion. I ended up deciding for one side. And as I was driving home back to Raleigh, I realized that I'd made a mistake, that I really should have decided the other way. And so I immediately got on the phone. I called the lawyers, and I said, look, I just made a mistake in this case, and I'm going to rule differently than how I initially ruled. And so the lawyer who initially prevailed didn't like it, of course, but I felt that was the right thing to do. And so, you know, that was another lesson to me as a lawyer, as a judge, that, you know, if you make a mistake, you need to correct it, because the people who bring these lawsuits take them at heart, and many times they've got their entire life wrapped up in this. And again, it goes back to that whole issue of trying to be as fair as you possibly can be to both parties.
I have never met a judge who doesn't have a funny story from court or something that really sticks out to them as like, shocking kind of moment. What's a moment that sticks out to you from your time on the bench, from a time in court like that? Do you have a memory like that?
I don't know if I have a memory like that. I remember the very first case that I heard as a judge was a trial, and it was in Whiteville, North Carolina, and it was a property taking without just compensation, and the plaintiff was the owner of a airstrip. It was just a airstrip where light planes would land on, and he made money by charging a fee for the planes to land on his airstrip. Just before the entrance, or just before the beginning of the airstrip, was a Duke Power tower, electric tower. And Duke Power came in and doubled the height of that tower. So what the planes would do beforehand is that the tower was just high enough that they could sort of go over it and then land on the runway. Well, when Duke doubled the height, now they had to start much higher, and they could no longer use the runway because they just didn't have enough space. And so at trial, there was a piece of evidence that was had been introduced, and I had decided that I was going to let it in. Now, this is my first case, my first trial as a judge. I'm trying to deal with many things in the courtroom, the jury sitting over there looking at me, the lawyers and all of this. And so counsel for the defendant asked to approach the bench. And they came up, and it was someone that I knew. And he said, "Now, Judge, you know if you let this evidence in, you're going to get reversed." And I thought about that, and I was thinking about all of these things that were going on at the same time. And I thought about, well, here I am, my first case on the bench, and I'm going to mess up and get reversed. And I told him, I said, I'm just going to have to get reversed because this evidence is coming in. Jury came back with one of the highest verdicts in Whiteville for a real estate taking. Case was appealed, as I knew it would be, and the appellate court found no error. So although not funny, one of the things that I realized is that you have to do what you think is right. And regardless of what you think the outside forces may be, you have to be guided by your own compass and your own sense of what is right and wrong. And so that was a lesson that I took from that case.
That's very good advice. And, the legal profession lends itself to stress and pressure on the attorneys, on the judges. How did you deal with that in your lifetime? How did you deal with that stress and pressure? What other outlets did you have to balance?
Yeah. Well, I have family, first of all. So, family was always an outlet. I would practice. You're right, there was stress in practice. But I would go home and I had 2 kids and I could play with them. And so that helped a lot. Friends helped a lot. I had organizations that I belonged to that helped a lot. And
what kind of civic organizations?
Civic organizations, fraternal organizations. I had other lawyers that I could go to and talk to. I had friends that I could get on the phone and call if I had any particular stressful situation that was going on. But I really didn't find the practice of law to be that stressful. I enjoyed it, and I had a good time practicing. But there was a time when I knew it was time to leave. And I think I'd gone to a hearing on a motion, and I felt that my client was right in his position. And we were before the judge and arguing back and forth. And I could tell that my blood pressure was going up. And after we finished it, coming back, I was driving, coming back to Raleigh. And I said, I think it's time that I get out of this now. But that was after having been practicing for 35 years. And so I reached a point then that I felt that it was time for me to go and do something else. But that was really the only time that I've sort of felt the real stress of practicing law.
And you talked about, we talked about that and outside the law. And what's your best advice to these younger attorneys who are coming up? Or what's your best advice to a new judge taking the bench?
I guess my advice would be for the lawyers, just work hard, represent your client as best you can. If you do that, then I think you'll get a good reputation for being a good lawyer, for someone who cares about their client, someone who does a good job. Even if you don't win. I remember when I first started, I started out in district court, and I found myself representing a good number of people who had been charged by police officers. For various things. And I was losing all my cases. But I was fighting hard for the client. And so what I realized is that when I would come out of the courtroom, there would be people standing outside. And then they would ask me for my card. And I'd give them my card. And that was one way that I could get clients. Well, what I realized then is it wasn't so much that I was winning or losing the case. It's just that those people who were sitting there saw that he was a lawyer who cared about the client, who was really fighting for the client. They lost, but that's okay. That's what they wanted. They wanted someone who could fight for them. And so for young lawyers, I would say do the very best that you can, work hard for your client, and you will establish a good relationship or a good reputation. For judges, listen to both sides, try and be as fair as you possibly can be, make your decision, and move on.
And for the Bar Association, describe changes that you've seen here through the WCBA and through the State Bar. What changes have you seen through your career?
I guess more diversity. I think the Wake County Bar Association is doing a lot more now than it did when I first started. It's a lot more sophisticated now. It has more projects. It just has more things that it's doing now. But I think diversity is probably the biggest change that I've seen. Just the number of people that we have in the bar, the fact that we have more women who are practicing law, the fact that we have more people of color who are practicing law, and the number. I mean, when I first started, we had a very small number of lawyers who were here. I don't know the exact number, but my understanding now is that we've got thousands of lawyers who are practicing in Wake County. And so it's a much larger bar. So I think, those are sort of the differences that I've seen.
Yeah. Where do you see the future of the profession going?
I'm not really sure. I think automation is going to have a lot to do with what happens to the profession. When I first started practicing, research was done by books. And so you had, I know in my office, we had this library with all of these books. And in order to do research, you had to go to the books, or you'd go to the Supreme Court library and do your research. When I was a judge on the Court of Appeals, my clerks had no books. Everything was done on the internet. And so they had Nexus and Lexis and Westlaw, which was automation. Now my understanding is that AI can write briefs, and I see that happening probably with motions and any documents that are going to be filed with the court. So I see automation as being probably the biggest change that lawyers are going to see over time.
Is there anything else that you want to add about your law career that you'd like to add that I didn't ask you?
Well, you ask a lot. I can't think of any additional things that you haven't covered. No, I think you covered most of the things that I had thought about in terms of things that we could discuss today.
No. Well, we thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I hope I made it painless.
You did.